Well, hello there. Welcome to today's podcast. I am Deborah Larson, the founder and a grief strategist who works with people navigating life-altering loss. And I'm your host today. So if you are snagged by a life experience that feels heavy, complicated, maybe even unfinished, well, then this episode should ring a freedom bell for you loud and clear. I'm so excited to be able to do this podcast with you. And I want to say that today we're going to be talking about something that we don't hear enough about, much less we all understand it. But the word is called duality. It's a phenomenon in which two opposites can exist at the same time. You know, in previous podcasts, I've talked about addressing how joy and grief, which is really sorrow, can coexist. And I remember saying that they're truly opposite, but yet one is an emotion and the other is a fruit of the spirit. And so when we're going through areas of our life where there's two things, we have night and day, we have good and evil, they're both polarizing, but yet they're not. And what I found, which was most beautiful, is that even where we're facing grief, loss, or trying to heal through it, our emotions and beliefs, especially when we're facing a life that we never prepared for, are totally challenged. So here's what I'd like to do is just kind of outline duality defined, if you would. So it's a unity of opposites, both very different, but paired as equal opposing forces. I kind of look at it like my husband and I. We're both very, very strong people. I'm female, he's male, but yet we're in a unity wherewith we become one. And this is the part that I love, that we remain part of a unified whole, and God is the representation of the ultimate unity, the unity in which all of duality is reconciled. And I found that to be a caption for today based on what we're talking about, that when we feel polarized, when we feel separate, we need to come under the covering that God himself represents the ultimate unity where everything is reconciled. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest and my dear friend, Tamara Spencer. So Tamara, you have walked through a 4-year journey of a long-term illness with your husband, John, whom we love. It wasn't quick. It certainly was not smooth. And it didn't follow an emotional script that some of us, especially Christ followers, just don't expect. But what I noticed was that God carried you through each stage with faith, with strength and truth. Tamara, welcome to our podcast. It's such an honor to have you on with us today. And pardon me if I get emotional.
Don't. You may trigger me, so don't.
Okay.
I mean, your intro is so beautifully said. I don't know if we need to say any more. You just what you just shared was so beautiful. So thank you for that too, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much. I take it as an honor.
It is an honor. I feel like we just have so much in common, even just prior to this episode and your life episode. But to lighten it a moment, why don't you share how you and I and my husband met, because I met him through you, and how we connected.
Well, I have always had the best memories of you and your awesome husband. He's always been like just this extra father figure in the spirit to me.
Oh,
And I remember because I was a pastor's assistant and I actually arranged for him to be the speaker on a Sunday. So I got to have some correspondence with Ray and just kind
yeah.
of get to know him. And it was just amazing. And I remember the first morning I saw you in the green room, you were just radiant. Yes, you were just radiant.
Yeah.
And I just remember seeing you were radiant and just the way you carried yourself with such confidence and beauty. I think
Oh,
at the time I was still in my 20s and I looked at you, I was like, I want to be like her when I grow up.
oh, Jesus, help me.
I just remember
Okay,
that
Lord, no pressure.
because there was just something so special about you. And it's not something that you can necessarily just manufacture in the physical. While you are just a gorgeous person, you always have been. It was also just again that what you carry, and most importantly, it's who Jesus is in you that really
Mm,
stood out.
mm.
And so I just been, I guess from that moment on, just been blessed to call y'all friends. And,
Oh,
y'all have been just huge cheerleaders in our life, like with my husband, while he was on this earth doing ministry, you both were there just to encourage him. And I know that's just what he needed. The Lord used you both in so many ways to just be a source of loving encouragement to him and to me. So thank you for that. I mean, y'all sowed seeds that I can never thank you enough.
Well, that's very kind. I receive it. I wasn't expecting that, but I receive it. Typically, I'm doing the interview. uh, I want to say I really didn't get a chance to connect with you and John till we moved back to Fort Worth. And it was really exciting because when Ray would go and speak places, he would come back and tell me things because he would connect with all the leaders. And I'm like, I just want to go talk to the people. I don't really want to be in the green room kind of a thing. I remember when you and John were transitioning from that location and some of the struggles that you were facing in Raymond's direction. I love it when I watch him step into a realm of supernatural knowledge, if you would, and or just this authority that he carries is so comforting to me when I see that, and how he loved John and loved you and wanted your best. You know, even taking a risk and like, I don't really care what this person says. I'm going to tell them what they need to do for themselves. You know, and I'm like, go Ray. I love it. I love truth to prevail every single time we get. So it was really much more personal when we moved here and then you and John would come down and help us try to do things at the house. And, you know, Ray thinking he's still 35 years old.
I mean, you know what? You can tell him. He can keep thinking that way. It's
I
okay.
am. I am. He's going to be as young as he feels. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to set the foundation because I know that we have a relationship, but somehow I feel like today, this is a foundation for a new relationship, for something that's different and yet the same. And I felt even this morning when I was just sitting and preparing for this, that God is like laying out a red carpet for something that we probably don't even know or understand, have language for, but the anticipation of knowing that we can walk with him through anything is it's a connection most people don't get. Even though it's through a painful time in our life, there's a moment of rejoicing in the anticipation of tomorrow, and that I can say, I'm glad I'm a part of that in your life, and this is beautiful. Now, if you don't mind, I would love for you to tell me about you and John, and tell our listeners. Just give us a background. You know, we talked about some things before when we were texting before we did this, and so I really do want to pound on the duality of it because that's really an important key phrase and things that God gave you. But why don't you just take us back to the beginning with you and John first, how you met, what God did, how you started your foundation, that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm really grateful for duality because the ending of our story was really painful and hard. So I'm very grateful for a memorable beginning. And I think in God's
Yes.
goodness, He brings that balance. And then we have those memories to lean into and help us walk through hard things. But I'd like to say there's some things about our story when I tell people is I'll tell you our story, but you shouldn't always copy our example. So
Yes.
I say that unless the Lord tells you, but I say that as my disclaimer before I ever share with anybody. And you might be like, what the heck are you going to say? And I'm like, okay, well, hold your
I trust
horses.
you.
Yeah. But I was 19 and I had basically just said, no, guys, I'm done. I'll get married. Maybe I'll get married when I'm 30 because you would think when the Lord tells you at 15 that you're going to marry a pastor, you would make decisions based on that word. But you know, your teenage brain doesn't always make connections to do that properly. So I didn't make the best choices. And I was like, you know what? Never mind. Just done with this whole guy thing. And so when like God shows up sometimes after you do a hard surrender, this was like one of those times because I put that down hard. Like I laid down that dream to be with someone. I mean, I feel like I smashed it to the ground. It was done. I was done. And then I go to church like within 2 weeks of this like surrender, and I see the Lord just pointing out, highlighting something in the bulletin. And for anybody that's like cool, young and hip, that's called a printout that we would read announcements
Oh,
on.
yes,
You
yes.
know, now that's, but they don't,
Yeah.
do see that nowadays. But I heard the Lord just like in my head go, "You're going to meet someone there." And I'm
Wow.
like, "Okay, okay." And I rationalized it, because that's what we do when we sometimes hear Lord say things. I was like, "Oh, I'm going to meet a friend. Okay, that's nice. I can never have enough friends. That's good. That's good, right?" So, long story short, I met John that night at this
Wow.
meeting of this event I saw on the bulletin. And it was basically a foundational meeting to plan a young adult and college ministry. And the pastor had asked him to lead worship for it and be the worship pastor for this new ministry because it was a bigger church. And basically, John, I guess he's always was driven, always passionate. So I guess he saw me and decided, "You're it," because we met on a Sunday night. We talked in the car with my cousin, who is the best third wheel ever of accountability. I will give her that. She sat through a whole meet. She was like from in the trenches from in the beginning of our relationship.
Wow.
um, she was like, "Yep, this is a thing," and she got to witness the whole thing when it started. And basically, he figured out where I worked in a
Ah,
in an intentional way, not a creepy way. I'd
yeah.
like to.
Yeah.
I'd like to. There's a difference. And he showed up on the first work. I worked at a doctor's office. The first day the doctor's office was open, he came in and scheduled an appointment so that he could see me again that
Wow.
week.
Oh, that
And
sounds like John.
yeah,
That
and he
sounds like
did.
John.
He came in for his appointment, and then he asked me out to go to this lake to walk around, and that was our first date. And basically, by the end of that date, we had figured out if we want to get married, how many kids we'd want to have,
Oh my
all
God.
the things that you tell people not to do on the first date to scare people away. We did it all. We covered every basis. It was very efficient.
Wow.
And that was our first date. And then we were engaged 2 weeks later. So, I mean, basically a 2 week, I met a guy and got engaged. So that's where my disclaimer comes in. Doesn't always work for everybody. Don't always recommend that timeline. But
Yeah.
when God says it's okay, then it's okay. And we got married exactly a year later because that was my parents' thing, which is amazing. They were like, "Do
Mhm.
premarital counseling, and you need to be engaged for a year." So we basically got engaged 365 days from the engagement. And then we moved to Texas 3 months later, and he had accepted a new ministry position at that time in Texas.
Wow.
So it was all very quick in motion. And I know for some people it freaked out how accelerated it was for us. But
Mhm.
I mean, in retrospect now, I wouldn't wanted to have dated for 5 years. I'm not here to judge anyone, but if in my case, that would have taken out of our timeline of how we would have walked out life together if because
Yes.
it got cut short.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm grateful that we freaked everyone out, got engaged quickly. They probably were like, "Oh my gosh, she's crazy," or "It's not going to last." And, we were married 21 years. Obviously, the
Yeah.
last four of those 21 were very difficult because he was
Yeah.
fighting cancer.
Yeah.
But I'm still grateful for that time and that beginning
Right.
because it was a gift. And I feel like every girl should be pursued like John pursued me. We're missing that in our society now.
Yes.
Intentionality, having the confidence to like go, "I want you." There's just something really special about being seen
And
and
being
and be
chosen.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of like the heart of the Father.
Yes.
I choose you. Like, why? Because I choose you. Because
Yeah.
that goes back to what was it in him, Tamara, that you looked at that relationship and what was your foundation? Because you have similar qualities like with Ray and I. And so I understand that John was very strong. He was very theologically grounded. He literally gave his life to whatever God asked him to do. And you not just supported him, but being so young and starting out with a ministry right off of the bat with not a lot of history and relationship, that's like a big gulp right there. So what was the foundation that made your relationship so strong?
I think we learned now with some bumps, learn to embrace each other's differences over time because we
Mm-hmm.
were very different. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
was more shy. He was more passionately intense and driven. You know, I'm more administrative and he's visionary, you know. But we found ways to make it work because I found, oh, I can administrate what you see.
Very good.
I can help you make happen what you want to do. And there's a dance to that. And
Yeah.
nothing's quite like figuring out what that dance is like by
Yeah.
practicing it in ministry. Cause
Yeah.
woo, that's a,
That'll test a relationship.
yeah. I mean, we served at a church that had 4 different pastors in an 8-year time period. And
Oh.
you'll learn a lot. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn about a lot about others. You learn a lot about your walk with the Lord through those types of times. And, you know, that I'm not going to say it was all easy, but I also can't regret anything because it did teach me a lot. I feel like I have things, though, from those experiences to help encourage others. Hey, maybe don't do that. Or, hey, yes, go do this or something like that. But
Yeah.
in the end, I think all those differences made us better in ministry together.
Mm-hmm.
We did like 12 years of pastoral marriage counseling for people. And we would have 2 very different viewpoints sometimes. Like I'll have the captain obvious, here's the female viewpoint and the guy's viewpoint, but also just our personality different viewpoints. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes it would help us talk to people better. And I guess also the bonus of doing counseling with other couples is it usually helps yourself. So it's kind of a
Yeah.
win-win. But I think over time we learn that our differences could be good. And
And that builds a strong foundation because it makes you face who you are, and you're either going to sink or swim. And that's
yeah,
where I feel like that God wove himself in your life, kind of like threading it with this third strand to give you this place that you could both latch onto, pivot, and then launch to. And I think that's been kind of like growing up with God, you know, in the terms of your one and only marriage and your one and only time and everything being thrown into the bucket of faith. And I think that has worked out your relationship because when he was in Fort Worth, before y'all went back to California, I remember that he had this high pain tolerance. Like he could just feel all kinds of pain and it didn't bother him. And I'm thinking, do you have no nerve endings? You know, I come back from the science part of it. I just remember
yeah,
his kidney diagnosis that didn't he have a huge kidney stone?
yeah, you're right.
Like a lot of
Memory.
physical assaults on him,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah,
And
and I think we called you one night. You were like, "Hey, is that?" I was like, "You can call Deborah and just run it by her, okay?"
I do remember that because I'm thinking, you're not going to pass this kidney stone. This will
No.
rip you in two.
Yes.
And people don't understand. I think they couldn't even obliterate it because they were going to go in and laser it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I don't know how small they can make that. Like that's going to be painful. And didn't he pass it that night?
All that stuff is just I was amazed. I I know some people say things and they sound like cliche or just in the moment, but I really think he was the strongest person I've ever met with what
He
he could
definitely
tolerate
had a
physically.
tolerance. He did. And I think sometimes like you were so health driven, just like I am,
Mhm.
you know, you're
Mhm.
using natural processes. And it's not that we're against the medical realm. It just was a better application for our choices. And
Yeah.
so choice has a lot to do with how our outcomes are, our belief
Yeah.
systems, our choice. And then that's why I said in the beginning, sometimes we think as we follow Christ or we understand a perception of the word or a promise or what the Bible says, nothing to negate any of it has to do with where it's rooted. And I kind of felt sometimes like John was like, oh, it's just a little bit of pain. And I'm thinking, dude, I don't think you're called to carry that kind of pain. I think that somewhere in your tolerance levels, he's been able to separate that function of his body to go, it's not that bad. You know,
Yeah.
I can tolerate pain. And we know we've birthed kids. There's that
Yeah.
moment, and then thank God it's over. But
Yeah.
it's not the same in a man. And so I was kind of impressed with that. But I can see why, and I'll go to this place
Mhm.
here when you talked about his diagnosis. So pardon me, I'll
Mhm.
transition. But due to that type of relationship and how you guys handled health, and whether you go to the doctor or don't go to the
Mhm.
doctor, and your faith, You mentioned earlier when we were talking about a misdiagnosis. It was the first time I'd heard that in our conversation. Can you walk us through that? Because this is all playing a part in the full journey here, where we have a pain tolerance, we're okay, and right now, a lot of people are taking charge of their health. They're wanting to go in this direction, and there's nothing wrong with that. So tell us how the misdiagnosis came about and what was leading up to that.
Yeah, that was a process. I think if I rewind and go about 10 months earlier, I feel like that's when the story really happened
Okay.
because he was having some weird symptoms and he thought, I'm just having an infection. But he
Right.
went into the doctor and they're like, you know what? We'll treat this as an infection, but I think you should get an ultrasound. And that terrified him.
An
And
ultrasound.
yes,
Wow.
he canceled it.
Wow.
Looking back through a sober minded, zoomed out perspective, it's like, yes, I know we don't want to overly be thinking we have this or this or this or that and focus on that in that direction, but ignorance isn't always bliss. And I'm all for the natural way, like if I can in every way. I went to a holistic college, like that's my
Sure.
background. So it's like I'm all for that, but you can't fight something you don't know.
Right.
And I feel like that was a decision that he made. I think from the perspective of I'm just going to tough this out because I can tolerate. If I tough
Yes.
this out long enough, it'll go away. Because that's actually probably how he's dealt with every injury, everything else in his life. And so on one
Yes.
hand, I understand the mentality and there's grace for that. Like I'm not here to be bitter about that, but there are things that we look back and you're like, "Oh, would that made a difference?" Because in that 10-month period there were weird symptoms that happened and then eventually there were some things he couldn't deny because he wasn't just passing kidney stones or doing things. Something else was going on in his body and causing horrific symptoms, and it had blown up so much because my husband had been later on diagnosed with prostate cancer, but the doctors thought it was bladder cancer because things were so bad in his bladder.
Oh my.
And and I could only wonder like what would have happened if we would have known 10 months earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What natural things, what things we could have done to have started combating it, because by the time he finally was forced to face what it was, it had exploded so much that even the doctors I guess had a hard time understanding what it was. I did find it though frustrating because we went into a doctor and he was misdiagnosed because they were saying it was bladder cancer, but I read the CT scan and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a doctor, but I've taken enough A&P. I've been there, done that enough to,
Yeah.
understand there's something wrong here when it says on the scan that they can't discriminate where a tumor starts and begins between two different organs. So that means there's potential of it to essentially happen in either place. And then it's
Yeah.
like, well, where's the root? Where's it coming from?
Yeah.
And they were so symptom oriented, they weren't trying to address where it actually started. And it took us trying to find a few other doctors, but sadly then it took 5 months more to actually get the correct diagnosis. And so zooming out, I'm like, well, now that's essentially 15 months on the clock till we actually got the right answer.
And that was here in Fort Worth, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
a long time. And then during that long time and knowing the strength in your relationship with God, that's I want to support you, but then I kind of want to say, "Hey, I talked to God and maybe we should do it this way." And
Yes.
that's that development of your relationship. You have carried that all the way through. From the time I have met you, you have always served well. You served him, and it wasn't about a hierarchy. Like there's a lot of people, and maybe I just need to make that clear. There are a lot of people in religious circles that this is that and this is that, and we have these roles. And although we do fulfill talents and skill sets and things that are necessary, I do believe that you and John had a mutual respect for one another, that there wasn't a hierarchy. There was an honor between the two of you. So when he would make a choice that you already knew from your background, this isn't a good one, like maybe we should look at some other things. How did that affect your spiritual walk with God, because you're questioning him, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And where John is sitting with that, how is that working for you during that time?
I think there are a few layers to that, but I think there are times where I, I would sometimes just feel something and not
Mhm.
always know and articulate. I just have a feeling about it. And
Sure.
that would be a different dynamic in our relationship because John's like, well, if you just feel it, does that really mean as much as you being able to like say something in words? And so we'd have to do that dance of like, this just doesn't feel right. And he's like, well, why? And I'm like, I can't tell you why.
Right.
You
That
know,
impression.
like so sometimes you'd have those things you would have to work out with each other.
Hmm.
And I mean, there's times though I learned like when I know that feeling, I know, and I'm a little tenacious about it. I'm just not like I'm going to beat you up or be mean or anything like that, but I I just wasn't willing to waver. There were
Right.
some things like I am
Right.
going to tell you what I think. And but if in the end you want to go right instead of left, I will support you because this is your body and it's your decision and I will honor you. We always had the philosophy in our marriage, we never want to have to anyone to have to use the veto card because I feel
Right.
like that you should never honestly have to get to that point. If I mean that should not be a regular occurrence. That should be a very rare occurrence because you should be communicating and have a mutual respect that is honoring in a way where you don't need a veto card. But there were some points on this journey that I allowed him to just not in a mean way, but in a loving way, like you hold the veto card for your journey.
That's fair. And yet, I know for myself, when I've worked out some stuff with my husband, and I know, like I know, but I can't tell him. And I do because that will just bring up all that tension. And it's not like you're going to get a divorce tension. It's like, I know, and I don't want to have to walk this journey with you because I know there's a shortcut. That's really difficult. I did find myself talking to the Holy Spirit. So I would go to the Spirit of truth and I'd be like, this is your son. This is not okay. You and I both know this is what's going on. I need you to speak to him because it's not going to come from me. And because it just wasn't going to be heard.
Yeah.
And we can all be that way. You can be tenacious and we can be forthright. And I found that the more that I leaned into that, I would wait and then I would watch. And the more I executed it, it would come faster. And I'm like, well, it's about time. you know,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this is a good thing. Thank you. It didn't mean I got what I wanted. It meant that the Father heard me. I could trust him. And however this played out, I knew that my husband was listening. I think that's really important when you're in a relationship, especially when you have to be faced with greater crisis as it gets. And it was up and down for you guys on different things. It wasn't one thing. Like we all get hammered. That's life. But
Yeah.
there's a place in there where we have to have that foundation, which is why I asked you. A foundation says this is where we reside. And so I had actually said to Ray when we got married, kind of fast like you. We didn't have a year to wait. We got married, but we kind of knew about each other. So another story.
See, that's why we're good friends because y'all didn't judge us, so we're
No,
good.
not at all. But I will tell you that I asked him, I have one ask, which is a non negotiable. And he's like, what is that? And I said, we both go to the Father. And let me just say this, I hear him clearly. Rarely do I not hear his voice. And if that's the case and we don't agree, then we go back and we pray again until we get a message that we both understand. And then we can share that. And if we don't do that, I don't want to be married ever. And he was like, well, of course. I'm like, yeah, don't just say of course, because I'm the woman who's going to go, we're going to go to the Father. You do it on your term, I'll do it on mine. We can talk in 3 days, but we're making no decision until we know, because it's hard to know biologically, professionally, and then spiritually. That can be a real tension. So I know that that really refines your walk with God.
Definitely.
Yes?
Yes, for sure. uh,
So, knowing you have such wisdom and intuition, I know that when that tension comes, how was it before you guys moved to California? Because I know that your daughter went back for
yeah.
a school there. So she went back and then you guys followed. And your parents, who are the greatest supporters I've ever seen in a family, beautiful, beautiful parents. and they went with you. So at what point in that what point in his health journey, I know he started to decline. So did it start to decline here before you moved to California? How did that play all into, how did that all come into play?
I think all of it applies because it was like a little bit of a roller coaster. Like he got better there, but also got worse there in Texas. And
Yes.
there was a moment he kind of felt like he was better here, and then it all went downhill too. So it was a little bit of a journey. But yes, our daughter went out to be a part of an arts conservatory because she's a professionally trained dancer.
He's a phenomenal
And
dancer.
thank you. And it was God used that. And in that time, at the beginning of that year, that January, before she had graduated high school to come out here, I said, okay, God, things are shifting around us. There's been some painful things that we've walked through in ministry. There's painful things we're walking through currently because my husband is fighting for his life. And it was hard. He didn't want to lay ministry down because I felt like it was his way. Like, if I lay this down, that means I'm giving up on life. And so
Yeah.
he still wanted to keep going and going, but it was taking a toll on him. And he has a high pain tolerance, like you covered before. And so because of that, he could pull off stuff for a short period of time,
He could.
quite remarkably,
Yeah.
and interact with people.
With
But
not
then,
showing a symptom.
no, but then it would wreck him.
Yeah.
And people wouldn't see that. And there's tension in our relationships around us because they would be like, well, you say that he's really bad, but he looks really good. And
Yeah.
there's all these layers going on all at the same time. And the Lord's just kind of changing things with us in our ministry. And, the Lord's also was showing me, hey, I'm going to call these staff members here and there. And some things were happy, some things were painful. Both things can happen in a walk. And I just felt so much shift at the beginning of a year when I guess it's an appropriate thing, to seek the Lord at the beginning of the year.
Sure.
And I felt like, well, if something doesn't change, we're going to close ministry, the church. We're going to lay that down. And by the end of the year, I knew that the Lord was saying, I feel like he was giving some grace in there, but we have permission since our daughter's graduating and
Right?
our son is in a place where he could move and change too with his schooling. So I felt like the Lord was giving us permission that it's okay if we are to change and do something new. And so he told me like 11 months before he told John.
Wow.
So I had to be patient in that time period. I know something's changing. I know it's going to happen. And by that, the end of that year, we had laid the ministry down, and John's symptoms had basically, at that point, we realized the treatment he had been recommended by the doctor had become basically not effective. So he was basically, they were trying to do like hormone therapy because they believed that was feeding the cancer. And then it was becoming like the cancer either mutated or something, and it was non-responsive to that treatment. And at that point, we knew things were getting worse. But, John was still being John. And so I can get better. I can do this. I can push through this. I can tough it out. And at that point, we visited actually our daughter. By the grace of God, somehow we had a little trip, got him out here on a weekend flight, visited her. And people walked up to us in the parking lot and said, I don't normally do this, but God told me that you're supposed to move here. And this was us visiting California. Yeah. And we're like, okay. And it was what John needed, because I already felt it. Like I felt it, but I had to go, okay, God, you got to tell him. So it was really beautiful that like at the end of that year time period where God said something would shift, God just used very direct yet non-related to me ways to tell him what he needed to hear. And so I was grateful for that, because I did wonder, well, does that mean, something else is going to shift with his cancer and his treatment? Maybe things will get better, because change can create the opportunity for hope. And while we wanted that, we moved a few months later out to California. I know it was God telling us, because I knew it. I mean, in the favor we had, the first day our house was on the market, we got a full price offer. Like it was.
Really?
Yes.
We didn't talk a lot then. I was shocked when you moved. I was like, they moved? We didn't even
Well,
know.
it happened so quickly,
Yeah,
and
it
it
did.
was I was having to carry it all because his health was going up and down, and I was like,
Sure.
"Are we going to get him out here?" And we
Yeah.
tried a new alternative therapy, and it actually looked like it was shrinking the tumor. And we're like,
Ah,
"Okay, this is getting better. Let's move. Let's get you out here." We got him on a flight, and we were thinking that this was like the start of momentum. Like,
yeah.
okay, this is good. But in reality, it ended up being it was like this band-aid of time so that we could get him here, because if he had gotten worse in that time period, I couldn't have got him out here. We would have been stuck in Texas, and that would have bankrupted us.
Yeah, and how beautiful that God knew already decisions that would be
Mm-hmm.
made,
Yeah.
because I do agree that a part of our experiences are our beliefs and our choices that we participate. He co-labors with us like we co-labor with him.
Mm-hmm.
And how beautiful that your whole family was together, you and the
Yes.
kids all at one time, and your parents there, and the transition had already taken place. I didn't know those pieces. I just knew that I trusted you guys, and that that's what the Lord said. It's not like it's my
Yeah.
business, but you know, there's so many things that people will chase, but when you feel like you're being escorted, it's a different
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that our listeners hear in this whole discussion how the ebb and the flow is important for communication, for groundedness, for faith, and for, is this going to turn out like we expect it to? Especially because that region is really promoted about healing. And I believe
Mm-hmm.
that that's God's will all the time. Anywhere you are, it's not only in one location. I think healing comes from within because I think he lives in
Yeah.
us. And yes, there can be power and agreement, and I'm fully aware of all that. But what no one saw but you, that was that he was bringing you all together home for whatever that outcome would be. And how beautiful, because your kids have grown so much through this. If we can we shift to what happened when it accelerated and the cancer spread in California?
After, again, by God's grace, we got here,
Yeah.
tried to have them, and
We had a
yeah.
beast view.
Yes, we got here and we had some transition, but we were trying to be optimistic. We got out here before my parents, and we're just kind of figuring out stuff. And my husband got worse overnight because he fell. And when he fell, it felt like a light switch of cancer had, like, I don't know how else to explain it. It just felt like everything ignited in his body, where
Yeah.
he wasn't aware of how painful or what was going on. It was like the light switch of awareness went off in him,
Yeah.
and he couldn't walk very well. He was admitted to the hospital, and that basically started a 10-month period of me caring for him full time, because either in that there's different points in there, but he either couldn't walk very well, couldn't walk at all.
Yeah.
And actually, this time last year in December, he had just had surgery to remove a tumor from his spine, because that pressure on the nerve in the spinal cord in that area was what was hindering him from walking. And they were trying to hope and think, well, maybe if we do that, that'll give him an extra lease to try to keep combating and fight. But they basically were like, it's too much. The oncologist didn't think anything would help. So that was a very sobering thing. And basically, we went from Northern California to 2.5 hours south down to Sacramento, met all
Mhm.
these doctors, and basically we had this impression, like, let's do this thing to help, to all of a sudden, oh, we're putting you on hospice. And this was
Wow.
like all switched in like an hour time period at the hospital. It's like I already knew in some ways in the back of my mind, my husband's fighting a terminal disease, because when you have cancer that's metastatic and turns treatment resistant, it's terminal unless something happens.
Yeah.
And so I know that, but you're still hoping that something could be different. And I feel like it's our responsibility as believers to still have that mustard seed, to
Mm.
hope until
Mhm.
someone goes to heaven. And that's what I teach my kids too, because it was a lot for us, and to
Mhm.
take care of him and all that. But I was like, I know that it's a possibility that dad might go to heaven, but it's our responsibility to believe that God is capable of doing something until he shows up in heaven. And if dad shows up in heaven one day and he says goodbye here, we're going to rejoice in that, because sometimes you're healed in this side of heaven here, and
Yeah.
sometimes you're healed in heaven. And I think we don't always want to talk about that there is that option, that we may not be healed this side of heaven, and when we have someone that has a terminal diagnosis. But when, at least when they know Jesus, we know that that promise of them being healed the moment they showed up in heaven is true. And there's such beautiful comfort in that. And I think that helps you as you see someone you love deteriorate and get closer to that transition of life.
Yeah.
You get through that time better, because you know that even if it doesn't work out the way you thought you wanted it to, it would still be okay, because they're going to a good place. Because what we went through, like, was traumatic. I would not wish what he went through on anyone, because he got to the point where, like, the hospice would provide like opioids and fentanyl patches and all that, and it still wouldn't cover the pain all the way. It just, and that to me is just heartbreaking. And so I had to hold on to the hope that he was going to be healed in heaven, to get through walking through with someone through a terminal diagnosis and caregiving for them full time. Because another thing I didn't realize with hospice, which they're amazing. There's a reason the Lord brought us here
Yeah.
to be with the people. I can see it. Like, it was there a gift, but they come a couple times a week, which is amazing. And I'm so grateful.
Right.
So grateful. But there's, they might be here like an hour a day, and there's 23 other hours to the day.
Right. It's you.
Yes. And it's
It's all
like you're
you.
on the edge and all of that. And so you have
Yeah.
to hold on to, well, even if something doesn't happen here, he'll be okay in heaven when he meets you, Lord. And you have to hold on to that with like a tenacity, because if not, it just breaks you down.
Answer is unforgiving. It is, to me, one of the most wicked ways to go, because it's a long-term deterioration, especially with his pain tolerance. When I look at that, I have 24, 25 years in medical and crossing over. It didn't matter where I worked. It didn't matter if I was in med surg and floated there, or if I was in ICU or doing organ donation. It seemed like God gifted me with people that were transitioning, and my faith helped them be stable even when I transitioned them to go home, and the child or the parent would have to, the spouse would care for them. And it's that place that I know Ray, and you know this, Ray was with his wife for 31 years, and 3 years of that was decline, even though it was up and down throughout their whole marriage. And I was talking to him about that in relationship to the adaptation of the shift throughout the journey, watching it. The last part, I think he described at the same time, was there's nothing that you really can do to intercept or to offset their progress. And that is probably the most vulnerable I think people feel. Like, I believe, and this is the hardest transition. I pair that against somebody who had an acute or a sudden death. There's such differences. When I talk about duality, there's so many differences and yet the same thing. And what I hear from most people is, but I believed this. And this is what the Bible says. I'm like, it is. But what we forget is we also get to choose. And there is a point where people decide, I'm done. My other girlfriend, she's in California, and we did a podcast a couple weeks ago, same thing with her husband. And he finally said, I don't want to live this way going into the last. I want to enjoy what I can, and I'm going to make that decision. And it was hard for her because she, like you, round the clock and working a full-time job, and there's no peace and no rest there. To me, that's where I see how the Spirit of God comes in and he supports you physically and otherwise, and you don't know how you've gotten through it, except in the day-to-day part of life, which we should be able to apply in our regular day-to-day life without trauma, right? That he sustained you spiritually and physically and financially, and he surrounded you with a population of people who would uphold you even at a distance. That to me is where life happens. That's where transition, faith foundation, and then real community comes in. We're missing that in our culture. And part of why we do this, Tamara, is because somebody else is asking those hard questions and they didn't have a foundation. Somebody else is going, but I'm mad at God because I believed and he didn't do. And they're all justifiable emotions. They are. And here's the biggest thing is you had time. How you handled that time was your choice. You could have stayed angry. You could have been, in dismay, or you could have chose joy, which I said earlier is a fruit of the spirit. It's not an emotion. Sometimes we do. Trust me, I've had a tremendous amount of loss in my life, and emotions can carry you away. And I'm not dismissing the overwhelm of loss at all. But what I do recognize is I can't always give it permission. And there's sometimes I just need to be steadfast and immovable. And I don't know, as I said earlier, I don't know is an appropriate answer, without making proclamations or judgments or shame or pressure on everyone around you, including yourself. And I see that you do that so beautifully, that you have such a voice in that place, and even just the aura of your spirit and your smile and where you are right now. This was this year this happened, right? Most people are like, what? And the joy in you even sharing about it is the expectation that you know where he's at. Now, if you don't mind, we talked earlier before we jumped on, and then I want to talk about duality. I know we're running out of some time, but I'm okay if we go over. Is that your daughter had a dream? Would you mind sharing that?
She just blows my socks off. She's had a couple dreams
The
that
fishing dream.
the fishing. Okay. She's always had dreams. She's always had God talk to her through dreams. And I just think it's beautiful. Even when her heart was hurting and she was tempted to be hardened when she saw her dad being sick and diagnosed, because that was her teenage years as well. The Lord still spoke to her through dreams. And after we had moved here, she had a dream that she saw dad walking to join his friend who had passed at that point from cancer in heaven, for them to go fishing together. And she was like, she knew that person's kids, and us were watching them, but we didn't get to stay there. And it was like this preview. I really think it was this preview of what actually is happening probably right now, because in God's goodness I can't imagine a better place to go fishing for John than in heaven, in the perfect place ever. And he gets to like hang out and worship Jesus and do it. And even my cousin had like a dream visitation, and she saw him fishing in heaven after he had passed.
So beautiful.
And all that type of stuff. It was just amazing how God prepares your heart. And that's another example of the duality. While you're hoping for something, God's also going, here, I'm going to tell you that even if it turns out differently, he's still going to be okay. And that you can't really escape the duality and all of that. Like he cares about our heart.
Yeah. I know in 2 Corinthians 6:10, it reminds me when Paul's talking about we can be sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. That is duality. People say this is a conflict for me because I feel like I'm betraying him, or I feel like I shouldn't move on, or I can't, and I can't embrace life. But yet it says we're not fake, we're not pretending. It allows two truths to live in the same heart. And there's where we have to recognize one doesn't cancel the other. One is an emotion, one is a fruit. One is a promise, one is a choice. And in that kind of is like an umbrella over our culture even today. Like your children, Noah, years before when we were here, and he got that first diagnosis, and he asked God about it. And I remember because John said this and this and this, and I said, no, it's not to be unto death. No, John, it's not supposed to be that. We were in your house, and Noah said, yeah. I go, what did your son say? And he said that God told him, yeah, that's not going to be a terminal thing for him. And there's a lot of opportunity in that. Like, people are going to be asking, how are your kids? How are your kids? Like you said, this was their teenage experience. This was what they lived with growing up. And yet, here's what I see about your kids. Noah's grounded. He's found his name. He's found his voice. He's found a passion and a purpose through all of it because you gave them the opportunity to see both sides. Sometimes we want to help them not see that. And sometimes I don't know what to do. And it's okay to cry together. And it's okay to say, I don't have an understanding for that, but we know this is what God said. And now we see that he's there with him, right?
Yes.
Same thing with your daughter. Same thing. Like the previous dreams that she had. Sometimes God's warning us. Sometimes God is saying, you can pray in agreement with this, but still we get to choose. He never, ever alters an individual's choice. He will not interfere with that. And that's what people don't get. Well, why did God? I go, well, why didn't we?
Yeah.
Because that's his sovereignty. And his sovereignty is, no, I want you to always be able to choose. I may not like all your choices. They may not be the best. They're not going to keep you from me, but it's okay. And you honored him throughout your whole marriage like that, Tamara. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Let's go into duality, if that's okay for a minute.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Because you brought up in our conversation, and let me see if I put your little sentences here because I wanted to remember them. How can you grieve what you lost and still feel peace? You can't even imagine the times I hear people say this or I read it on their post and I just want to just weep. It's not that hard, but it can feel that way. How can we miss somebody deeply and carry out a heart of gratitude? You can miss them and still have peace. The opposites can still exist. This is what God has been showing you. And I know that I wanted to ask you, did this start coming towards the end of his transition? Or did this happen after he passed and you were looking at a future that you never thought you would ever have to plan for?
Probably both, because I think it intensified after. But
Okay.
I think in the Lord's lovingness and knowing how, I have a little bit of an administrative bone in my body. I think in his grace, he kind of like helps you start seeing and consider things ahead of time, but
Of
it
course.
doesn't have to be that way.
And there's no
But
shame in that. You're
no,
seeing the heading.
yeah,
You're
but
like, I can't be stupid here.
but I was also like, I can't deny seeing your hand in this, even though I'm walking through hell. And a lot of times we grow up in church hearing Psalm 23.
Yeah.
I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And I think some people think that that's what happens after you take your last breath. But I really think some
Right.
people, their valley, like John's valley, was not after he took his last breath. It was the
Right.
existence. He was living in hell. And I'm living in a version of that, watching and taking care of him. So,
Yeah.
but I there's that happening, but there's also like, well, God's taking care of us. God's providing. He's taking care of
Yeah.
our medical coverage. He's taking care of our groceries, our food, our bills. Someone would randomly send something to bless my kids. Like I could
Oh,
not deny seeing God's hand in it. And then it just intensified after John had
yeah.
passed because I would see people love on him. I mean, I don't think there's a youth leader at our church that didn't reach out and doesn't continue. Like they still check on my
Oh.
son. He's a high schooler.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
we had members from the church bring us food. His school was incredible. The teachers would check on us. Naomi, in her ministry school, her assigned staff pastors and their crew all would check on us. Like I couldn't deny that God was with us
Yeah.
and caring for us. But sometimes we want to go, well, God is only with us and taking care of us when everything went well or met a certain expectation. And I feel like that's really, really dangerous because we live in an imperfect world where there's an enemy he's out to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
So sometimes we're like, well, God only did something good when everything came together the way you expected. And
Yeah, that's
that's
not reality.
no. I'm like, if there's a reason that we want heaven to meet earth, like,
Mhm.
right? If we look at even the Lord's Prayer, if we can see that something needs to encounter us here, then shouldn't that tell us that not everything is going to be perfect here all the time?
Yeah.
But it's also our job to look for God in the midst of those things. And it's like when you go through this, you're supposed to count it count all joy through circumstances and stuff, you're like, oh, I know this verse, but now this stings, you know?
I don't want to speak this verse right now. I'm really kind of in neutral
I
here.
I'm like, do I have to do this? But it's like, no, it's because his joy gives us strength.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that we have to be happy about everything. It's not that we have to even approve of the way things went. But it's our job to go, let me see you in this. Where are you in this storm?
Yeah.
And I think that's the duality of the walk, where you're grieving an expectation of how things are going or how they didn't go.
Yeah.
And where are you, God, through this? How did you take care of me? And I think that's where gratitude and perspective become a weapon. And I do
Yes.
think that they help you grieve faster. If I know that might not be the best word, but I feel
No,
like there's an acceleration there.
there is. I call it shortcuts. Let me just say this. None of us want to have a prolonged grief. The reason why I don't go to cemeteries is because it ties me to the grave, and then I get pulled into a grave, and then my emotions can topple. It's not like we talked earlier. You still remember. You
Yeah.
remember all of it. And the other day, I just was flipping through pictures, and I saw this recording that my brother did when I was at Jeremy's graveside. The only two gravesides I've ever gone to is his dad and my son. That's it. I just don't go. And I'll go to the ceremony, but I don't go to the graveside. And it was this whole time when his brothers were carrying the casket to have it lowered. And I'm watching my sons do this again. And now I'm sobbing again, going, wow, like this is overwhelming, because you can't unsee what you see. You can't forget. And your emotions and your feelings will come right back up. Now, I was in a place of great gratitude. I was excited, and I'm like, looking at his brother, I'm thinking the middle son, God has so blessed his life. I was thanking the Lord for all these great things. Looking at his other brother, I'm thinking, okay, I need you to really speak to his heart, because we handle it differently. Sometimes we pack it down. Sometimes we let it out. Sometimes we just transition and pretend, and I'm going to handle it this way. And 10 years later, it's going to show up again. And yet, here we are in this place. And that's why I think duality it's the way of life. We get to choose joy, or we get to choose grief. I'm not saying those emotions don't happen. That's a biological truth.
Yeah.
But we have to remember it happens to us, and our body's just trying to defend and assault. It cannot understand. But when we look at it through our reasoning, whether it's the soul, but preferably the spirit, you get to ground, like I was sharing earlier. When something comes up, I weep, I cry, and then I'm like, what are we doing here? Because I am full of joy. Those are the things I think prepare you for your future, which I have to say this. I'm so excited to see your blog post as you're sharing a little bit about your journey. And thank you for taking the time to share with everybody today. But your life 2.0, all this journey of 4 years, your whole foundation in your marriage, how you raised and communicated with your kids is so profoundly, it's a statement of the profound love and character that you guys carry, that they saw, and God is blessing. Because you're telling me your daughter's going to be 21 and your son's graduating high school. I'm like, where is the time gone? But you're taking all these beautiful hikes, and then you send me these posts with this stuff, and I'm like, I remember that mountain. Yes. It's so good. And being out in nature, people are like, I got to buy grounding sheets. I'm like, go outside for 10 minutes on your bare feet. It's like, I need the sun so bad. And you recognizing that people don't recognize that's an important thing. Go for a walk.
Yeah.
Let the trees speak to you. Let the calmness. There's something about the mountains that brings like the peace of God. And in there, in that moment, I guarantee you're able to let some thoughts and some emotion surface, and it's not taking you out, because you're like, I can hear you. Oh, I can feel this. This is therapeutic. And as you were saying on one of your posts, did you know, was it somebody else shared it with me? I think it was you about the neuroplasticity, about how our neurons heal. I'm like,
Yes.
right on, girl. They
Yep.
certainly do.
Yep.
To me, those are shortcuts of the things of the spirit. Hey, I provided this for you. Use it. It's free. I provided
Yes.
this for you. It'll give you peace. It'll do things you can't even recognize are happening. And that's your 2.0. Like, girl, how many more hikes are you going to go on?
As many as it takes to build more neural pathways is the way I look at it. I need more happy synapses in the brain, you know? I'll just keep going. But there is a beauty to pairing Christianity and science.
Yes,
Because
it's
to
all been
separate,
created for us.
yeah, I'm like, there's no
Yeah.
new thing under the sun. God created it all to begin with. So why are we being silly and separating it? One can testify the other if we're willing to clear out the filters of all the icky. Okay, that's another story. But
No, it's all
just,
good.
you know, like, it, look at waterfalls, happy ions, or the ocean. You get happy. There's those ions in the air from the water movement. And it's like,
Yes, it
there's
is.
a reason, like, they've done documented studies on how that makes you feel better.
Yeah,
And it's like, that's beautiful. Like, that
it
our
is.
environment can affect us towards good. And sometimes we have to seek out those environments that will encourage and help us to renew our mind. And if that's a hike, then go for it. If that's a
Yeah.
walk. But for me, give me some trees and something pretty to look at. Cause I need it's like it was survival. Like, I need to know that something's bigger than this feeling.
Amen to that.
Like, something, like, because the feeling of grief will, there's a temptation to let it consume you. And I feel like when you get out and you get out of the box, you are reminded, and you're forced to be reminded, that there is something
Mhm.
bigger than that emotion and even that memory. Like,
Yes.
I go look at a mountain, it's like, oh, where do I get my help from? Mountains. Like, it makes the
Yes.
verses come alive. I'm like, well, if God can create that mountain, then I have to, yes, deal with this grief, but I also should be able to have hope that there can be a future for me and that it's not all done. I'm 42. I shouldn't be tempted to be depressed and think my life is over.
Right. And you know what, Tamara, that brings me back to, I know that Ray didn't know this because I know you and he had a conversation and I thought it was beautiful. Um, how about his blessing? How about John's blessing over you? To me, I cried when I read that. I was like, wow, that to me is such love. It's his love knowing. Would you mind sharing that?
Yeah. Now, some things I will have to give the hospice counselor and pastoral staff credit for. We had this amazing pastor named Terry, and he helped walk John through some stuff because, again, sometimes in
So
John's
good.
strength, he was like, if I don't deal with this, if I don't talk about it, I won't have to face it.
Yeah.
And the irony is, like, you had to be faced with some realities, and they would tell their patients, like, hey, you need to talk to your family about this types of stuff. And
Mm.
so, because of that provoking and that encouragement, it allowed us to have a conversation about, hey, kids, this is what I want for you when you find love. I want you to be happy. I want you to be successful. I want you to follow the Lord. I don't want you to think whether I die, that means God was bad.
So
And
good.
then he was like, I also want to look you all in the eyes, the kids, and go, hey, I'm giving your mom permission to remarry. She doesn't have to be alone the rest of her life. I don't want her to be alone. And it was a lot, because I I in my younger age, because I met him at 19,
Right?
and I thought it was. I mean, I spent more than my half of my life with this person, at that point. So I, in my young age, I thought, oh, that if I vow I never would remarry if I lost him. If I thought that was an expression of loyalty.
Yeah, right. And we
And
make those vows.
yeah, and I actually had to undo that with the Lord and be like,
Right?
well, who am I? I'm not there. I made a vow, a covenant with my husband and you. That's all the vowing that needed to be done. I
Right.
don't need to overexpress anything. So it was like, and I had already gone through that process with the Lord, and then to hear John say, hey, you have my permission to live life. If you find someone, I want you to be loved, because he didn't want to leave us. He
Of course
he
not.
there's a
Of
point
course
we had
not.
to go. It's okay, you can go. we'll,
I know.
I had to tell him we'll be okay. And I'm telling him that and myself at the same time.
Of course.
Um, but it was love to go, hey, I want you to live. I
Right.
want you to be loved. And sometimes that's the utmost expression of love that you can get is
It
I'm
is
going to
the
put
most
aside.
pure, is the purest thing I've heard. Tamara, so many people wished they could have said goodbye to their kid when they went out the door,
Yeah.
or yes, I want this for you. We don't talk about this as a culture. We don't talk about this because we're taught, like you said, especially in a religious spectrum, this is what we do. We're okay. We don't even recognize that we're making vows. We're just making a
Yeah.
promise to ourselves. Like, listen, that'll keep you in bondage. And then it will keep you tied to this grief thing that I know happens, but it's not a death sentence. It's not we humanize it. It's not that. It is a process of where we both can learn to grieve. Jesus said he was acquainted with grief. He didn't
Yeah.
tie himself to the grave and jump in. As a matter of fact, he rose. So I'm looking at that thinking, what a beautiful ending to the story of your relationship in your marriage, the great beginning, and this kiss and this push off into the ocean. Yes, go find the
Yeah.
future, because truthfully, he's already watching. He's already taking care of it. He's going, this is beautiful. Look at my kids. I don't think people recognize that they actually still get to participate in what's going on in the earth. They get to be a part of those events. We think, well, they're missing. They're not missing. We're missing. We're
Yeah.
missing the future we didn't get. But he's provided another thing for you. And I think it's remarkable that you've already embraced that. To me, that's the courage and the choice of a 4-year journey. I can let it take me out, or I can pick up the pieces as we go. It's out of the desire of our hearts that start to raise up. And God's like, hey, it's good. Will you do it like this? Let me walk with you here. Those are things that are beautiful. I I know we have to close. I really don't want to. But I want to thank you because your story shows so much that most people never learn. They don't know how to identify what they feel. They don't know how to talk about it. And I'm grateful for your hospice people, because we're trained to do those kinds of things. And it's the most difficult, because if you think for a second they go home and forget all of your emotion, they don't.
Yeah.
It's self-care that's important, but the grief and the gratitude that you have allowed to sit together and to reside in your heart is both about God being present and about you choosing rightly, because he said, choose life. Choose life. It's what we get to do. 4 years in slow motion. I can't imagine 4 years in slow motion, Tamara. And yet the Spirit carries you through every part of it, almost setting up a domino effect for you for afterwards. I'm thinking, dang, this is a beautiful story. And seeing it that way is like, it doesn't shift the outcome, it shifts the perspective of the future. And I think that's what we're looking for. We need to stay in hope, right? You said that. You've got to stay full of those things, not because we're pretending, because we're all doggone real here, but you didn't have to choose between peace or sorrow. You didn't have to choose between grief or life or living forward. And your kids are blossoming for it. And you're only 42 and you have a whole future ahead of you with grandbabies and weddings and all the great things I get to be invited to.
I don't, I know that neither one of my kids have the special someone that they're gonna settle down with, but they
Yeah,
already know that you'll be there whenever they do, whenever they say I do.
will
You
come.
and Ray are there.
Will come.
But
So, in closing, Tamara, and for those that are listening, what would you say to them? Just overall, what could you say to them? Hey, if I could talk to you right now and you're in this place, what would you share?
give your pain a purpose. I don't think that we can stuff it, but
Right.
because that'll ooze out later. But if we can shift to go, okay, Lord, this hurts, but I need hope. I need vision for the future. Help me to see my story through your eyes. then we can give our pain a purpose. And as hard as those conversations can be, because you're usually doing that from a painful place and a place where you're hurting, just do it, because no one is immune to pain. All we can do is be in control of how we respond to that pain, and that we can meet it with, I can have hope that my days ahead can have memories to be made, or I can be stuck and let grief be my identity. And
Yeah.
if I could say to anyone, is do everything you can to not identify with grief. That doesn't mean you're not recognizing your pain. It doesn't mean you're stuffing it, but you're not allowing it to be, this is the thing that defines who I am.
Right.
I'm going to go, this was a part of my story. And yes, it marked me, but it's not all of who I am. Like, I'm a widow, but I can't make that my whole identity of Tamara the widow. I have to be, I'm Tamara. I am a daughter of God. God
Yeah.
loves me. I have a hope and have a future. Yes, I'm a widow, but it's not all of who I am. And I
Yeah.
feel like if someone is a widow, if I could speak to that person specifically, be like, just don't allow that title to consume your identity. Let
That's
what
right.
God says about you define your identity. No one's saying we're denying the pain. Just let what God says about you to rule the most, because what you do in this time with this soil of life, that metaphor, is going to be like a deal breaker. It's going to be the amazing time of growth, or you can stall out and not have anything germinate there. And what I'm saying is, when you go through something hard, you are making the ground for something beautiful to come later. And
Yeah.
I think we get to control the soil of our heart and be like, hey, God, I'm a hot mess, but I need you to use this hot mess towards your glory. I feel like we could, make that the modern translation of some verses.
Yeah.
Like the Message in NLT modern day. God, redeem this hot mess of me.
Right.
Redeem this pain. But you know what? In his goodness, he will, and he can, and he loves those prayers. He'll meet you in that spot. We just have to go, God, here I am. You don't have to go to him perfect. Go to him in your snotting, crying mess. Whatever. Hey, even if you're angry, he can handle it.
Yeah. He can handle it.
He can just go have a conversation and see what happens. I
Yeah.
guarantee he'll be there.
Tamara, thank you. Thank you for that powerful close. Thank you for imparting to those who are listening. And I look forward to the time you get to come back and then talk about, 2.0 and where God is taking you. And for those that are listening, she has a blog that she's been writing on. If you want to follow it, I'll put it in the show notes down beneath this so you can follow that. But today I want to say that I feel like we expose the reality of grief, the truth about duality, so we don't have to be conflicted with emotions versus choice. There is a big difference. It's not a conflict. Duality is not a conflict. It is permission, because God seems to apply the core message of Tamara's story to somebody else that's facing the same challenge. So take it in. I want you to remember that the scripture says that you can be sorrowful yet rejoicing. We are held in weakness. We are met by God, who comes to heal the brokenhearted. I think that's essential. So let it speak to you. Let it resonate in your heart. Drink in what Tamara shared, and then share this with somebody else who absolutely needs to hear those words. From a widow to a widow, it's okay, because the widow's mite was recognized by Jesus, and your place and what you lay down before the Lord will be recognized by him too. And so I just want to ask that you follow us, share this, and then come back. We'll let you know when Tamara is going to be on again.